Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Wisdom Chat. I'm your host, Phil Holdsworth, and my wonderful guest today is Crystal McGilvray. Crystal, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
It's a real pleasure having you on the podcast, and I'm really inspired by you, Crystal, because not only are you the finance and behaviour change catalyst for entrepreneurs, but you're also a neurodiverse award-winning founder of your Mind Over Money. But it doesn't stop there, does it? Because I mean, you're involved in so much. And I was just looking at your sort of resume in terms of your profile, and when I look at the areas where you're founder or you're a director, non-executive director. There's different organizations. You're a member of Opus, you're a member of board of directors for, is that Abians?
Yeah, almost.
Oh, right, almost, right. My apologies. You're a financial specialist with Hatch Enterprise UK, but also, and this is interesting, you're a delegate for the UN Commission on the Status of Women. I mean, as we were just chatting a moment ago about, you know, where do you find time for you? And all of that.
It's a good question. I mean, you know, when you love what you do, it doesn't even feel like work. Like I genuinely love waking up every morning and just excited to get started and meet with people, have conversations, whether it's my clients or whether it's, you know, a business partner, or it literally just fills me with so much joy because I can see the difference I'm making. So
yeah, and you can tell. I mean, just talking to you, you sort of exude this passion and this excitement.
Yeah.
So I really appreciate that. Just Crystal, tell us a little bit about your journey to where you're at today and what you've been involved in and why.
Yeah, for sure. So background is in financial maths. That's what I studied at university. And I remember saying throughout the whole 3 years, I'm not going to be an accountant. I'm not going to be an accountant. That was my first job straight out of uni. And I did that for 12, 15 years. I should count really. And I've been teaching maths since I was 18. And it was actually through teaching maths in my local community. You know, I grew up in a single parent home. So the people I was teaching maths to, some of them had some really difficult situations, you know, whether it was learning difficulties or being in a home and I could see that they weren't getting the right support from, you know, family. I remember one incident, and this is really relatable, actually, really, I think this is where the pivot happened for me. I went and I was charging like £18 per session to teach maths at, you know, 21 years old. And this boy who I thought was 13, but actually was 18, who called me for a maths lesson. At the end of the lesson, he gave me a wad of about £300 in notes and was like, here you go. And I was like, no, just one, and I'll give you change. And it just confirmed his learning difficulties. And, you know, there was an auntie in the house who wasn't paying attention. I just thought, there's something here. You know, there's people who are struggling mathematically, financially, you know, and I hadn't really been exposed to that. So I think as I continued my career as, you know, head of finance, etc., and I was like, this is not enough for me. I want to do more. And I've been supporting people around me with their personal finance and business finance anyway. So yeah, in 2018, I quit that and dived in really, which is just before the pandemic, as we know.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's interesting that, because that's what, first of all, grabbed my attention about yourself was, you know, what a thing to do to suddenly quit your work to become an entrepreneur at the most difficult time in our nation's sort of history with regards to a pandemic. And we all know, I mean, the repercussions of that pandemic now, we're still feeling the effects of. For sure. Poor mental health and an increase in terms of how that's sort of affecting a wider population. So it grabbed my attention, did that. So
Mm.
what happened then?
So I took myself traveling for a year and a half, to be honest. I was like, I need to get out. And on those travels around Asia and Africa is where I literally sat in cabs with my big old rucksack planning what I do now. The power of intention and writing it down, all of that good stuff. But I came back, and it was the pandemic, was locked away. But that's where we just started doing my work. I started working with people one-on-one. I started delivering training workshops. And it just started to pick up momentum, and organizations such as Albright and Hatch Enterprise reached out for me to build programs. Like, for example, one I did with Albright and Boots number 7. That's still live today. And it just kind of snowballed. I've done work with Equifax. So kind of the crux of what I do now is, like I said, the money coaching, training, going into organizations, providing fully fledged, programs. And I took myself back to school and did a master's in behavioral and economic science, which, for those who don't know what that means, and I don't think anyone should, is basically the psychology of decision making. Because I saw, as we speak about, me and you spoke before, giving people the information of, hey, this is how you save, or this is what a credit card is, and this is how you use it. They're not necessarily going to say, okay, I will change exactly what I've been doing for 30 years and do it this way. That's not enough. And I saw that quite quickly. So I was like, I need to learn what's happening, why they're not making the decisions that, the economic man knows is the right thing to do. And that's where I've now incorporated all of that into everything I do, and neurodiversity and the traits as well that we know about.
It's interesting because as we were talking before we started to record this episode, and I said what grabbed my attention was you being a public speaker as well. And you would speak on subjects such as the psychological dynamics of confident financial decision making. I know there's another person in the industry called Chris Budd, who's the founder of the Institute of Financial Wellbeing, and he wrote a book called The 4 Cornerstones of Financial Wellbeing. And one of the emphasis that he made was about decision making, and a lot of the research in terms of behavioral science and money psychology has actually looked at decision making. And I never thought about this until I reflected back in my time within the investment management world. And then I realized that I'd actually seen some of the behaviors that changed dependent on what was going on around a person. An investment manager, when the market's nice and buoyant and everybody's happy and things are calm, are able to take on board all the information that's needed to present it to their clients. And yet how different it became when suddenly the market was volatile. And then it was interesting watching the different behaviors and the different biases coming out. The herding bias, where people just observe, well, what are you doing? Oh, you're selling. I'll sell as well. Yes. And you're thinking, hang on a minute. Where's all the rational thinking and looking at the evidence and so on? And actually, just in general society, we can all be susceptible to things like that, can't we?
Well, we are. And that's, I remember doing I think I was on BBC Radio Coventry. That's where I'm based at the moment. But I remember doing a slot talking about that. And I can't remember his name, but he was like, have we got any hope? And I was like, don't word it like that. But we all are, influenced by our emotions, that we are human, that, that's a significant part of what makes us human. So yes, we are. And I think I'm reading again the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And, we talk about, right. And I love the book, I love what he talks about, but we do have those emotions. It's all about becoming self-aware, and that's part of the journey. It's a good thing to understand how our emotions impact us, because then we can become aware of our decisions and kind of think twice, and not just walk around and make decisions mindlessly, which is what most of us do. For good reasons and bad, actually, because we know that we need to do this stuff. We can't actively have every single decision at the forefront that we're making consciously.
And it's interesting as well, having worked in the finance industry for so many years, and now realizing and recognizing that we have some way to go to help people understand this element of the emotional attachment we have with finances, with money, and how that influences our decision making. And you sometimes, I don't know about you, Crystal, but sometimes I feel like I'm banging my head against a brick wall when we're talking about this, even though, you know, both you and I will know this is powerful stuff. If you could really understand, not only for yourself, but say as an employer for your employees, this would revolutionize things for many, many people. And it's how we get that message across to them. This whole area of decision making and money psychology is huge. And I thought, because a lot of research had been done in the States, the Americans would be further on than ourselves. So I commissioned somebody to do some research between both the British and the American culture to see how more advanced were they in their thinking regarding money psychology. And what really astonished me was there's a lot of research there, a lot of people writing on it, a lot of people speaking about it. And yet we seem to be very similar in terms of our behaviors. And I thought, how do we take people to the next level of understanding that self-awareness is one of the key parts of financial well-being?
I mean, really amazing
Work that you did there, and I think I'm not surprised by the findings. And we know that when it comes to academia and the research, getting into business, getting into government, you know, that's another conversation in itself with the topic we're talking about, right? People being better with their money. We talk about debt and banks and what that would mean. But we know there is a snail paced movement from transferring the knowledge that scientists and researchers uncover and bringing it out. It's funny because I went to do my master's with full intention of doing a PhD. Like that was, I actually thought I could jump straight in and do it. And they were like, no, darling, you need to do a master's first. But I've done the master's now, and that's where I discovered I was neurodivergent. And then I've like stopped and thought, but I've learned so much. I have now access to so much information without having to do the PhD. I still want to, but actually this stuff needs to be out there. So that's why I've actually stopped and I'm doing what I'm doing now, because like you're saying, it's we need to get this to the people so they can be better, their households can be better. This pandemic we have in terms of people's finances.
It's you could say in one sense that we kind of we're individual voices, but we're singing from the same hymn sheet in a sense. And it's quite easy for somebody to look in and say, you know, what difference will that make? And it just reminds me of that story of the boy who threw the starfish back into the sea. And somebody made the comment, you know, well, that's not going to make much difference when you see a beach full of starfish. And he said it made a difference for that one. And I suppose that's what drives us, isn't it? The fact that, you know, you're making a difference on an individual basis. But you realize as well as a nation that the work there is so vast. And I just wonder sometimes, how can we work in such a way where maybe, and you do this in terms of collaboration, you know, that we're able to collaborate in such a way that we're really knocking on the doors of decision makers to say, look, there is a better way going forward. I mean, what's your thoughts on that?
I mean, I think when it comes to mass impact, which is what we're talking about here, that's always been at the forefront of my mind. And it's great to hear you mention the importance of helping one person. And sometimes I'm so wanting to help much more people that I get lost in, actually, Crystal, that person has 4 children. That person's a single parent. They've now cleared £11,000 debt, saved 7,000. Now they're going to buy a house. They weren't before. You know, when I remember stories like that, I'm like, actually, I'm making a difference. And I think you're right on the whole collaboration piece, and maybe also targeting, like you said, the key organizations or the key firms that have access and are impacting larger groups of people. I think that's where we're going to make that change, because then it can filter down. I mean, ideally, of course, governmental change is required when we look at financial education. And one, the fact that it's not fully embedded in every kind of curriculum, it's not fully there. And then two, there is work required in terms of what they're actually teaching. Again, goes back to what we mentioned just a second ago. It's just financial education. They still need the skills. They still need to learn about the attitudes, the emotional side. There's so much that needs to go into it. So it's tackling those areas so it can infiltrate down. And if we talk about schooling, it's a whole nother conversation, because the teachers need the support so they can teach the stuff.
Yeah, exactly. I think, just touching on that very briefly, oftentimes subjects like that, they're not given the same level of importance as the general sort of maths, science, English, and things like this. It's a life skill, and but it's usually handed to somebody who might have spare capacity in their curriculum. And you're thinking, but what about them as an individual, and helping them, because they might feel inadequate, really, in being able to talk about some of this stuff because of their own circumstances.
There's research that literally
shows that teachers are not equipped to teach this stuff. They don't feel confident themselves, which we know. Me and you work with these people all the time, and we're just talking about adults. Forget, teachers, sure, they're a specialist in geography or specialist in whatever their field is. Doesn't mean they're a specialist in money and financial well-being. That's a completely different category. But that's maybe where the confusion comes in terms of, but we're just teaching them what a bank account is. But that's not the tools, the skills they need to go and make those right decisions going forward.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a different education that's required.
And I mean, this is just one. I'll just mention this, but this is one of my, I suppose, a little bit of concern, and that is the assumption that the banks are the right ones to come and do the financial education, and that's not to decry, the content of any of the training that they do at all. I'm not criticising that in any way. However, at the end of the day, the bank's a business, and it wants to secure its future. And so naturally, they want to draw the next generation in to be their customers. And one of the elements that really struck me was individuals' ability to be able to make choices between, in this case, say, one product and another product, and having the skills, the knowledge, and the understanding to be able to make choices that are right for them. And so, and I thought, well, how are they going to get that in those circumstances? And it's just one of those, right, okay, yeah, there's a few factors, isn't there, in terms of, educating the next generation, and educating them on their self-awareness and what drives their decision making.
Yeah, and it's a really interesting point you raised there, actually, because I thought it was going to take that another way when it comes to banks providing the education, down to, if I give an example, which you might have heard about before, but I remember coming across a study where a couple of credit card aid companies were involved in a study to get customers to pay and clear their debt sooner rather than later. So they worked with a behavioral science organization to tweak the wording on the emails. And I think there was three, I think there were banks involved, and they saw a reduction or an increase in the payments, which meant a reduction in interest charged and paid. And as a result, 2 pulled out of the study. And that just highlights what we know a bank is and how we know they make their money, right?
Yes.
So, there is that also that element in terms of, our banks, are these organizations the right, are they giving them real objective guidance? And
that is it is an interesting point, that objectivity in something as crucial as what I call a life skill, and that's the ability to sort of manage one's own finances and understand themselves and their relationship with money going forward. So interesting. Just on that though, the psychological dynamics of confident financial decision making. Now you've put that as a subject that you're quite happy to talk about, and I think it's a really key subject, along with a few other things as well. But let's just open that up a little bit, if we may, in terms of what are we talking about decision making? What are these kind of the influences that come into play when we're making decisions about our money?
Yeah, and so we've been talking about part of that already. So one part is, of course, our emotional state. And I think you gave the example about the change in investors' behavior when things are going bad on the market and the fact that all of a sudden there's no logical thinking, right?
Yeah.
So the same thing happens. Forget the investment banker. Think about us, the guys that go to Sainsbury's, us just walking down the street. The same thing happens there. If you're in an emotional kind of heightened state, your ability to make logical decisions is under attack. We've got things like cognitive load. You struggle to think clearly. Now that is of course going to affect, like you just said, choosing the right product. If you're emotionally heightened in some kind of way, that's influenced. And outside of that, so we talk a lot about emotions, but there's also your attitude and your self-belief. I talk about self-efficacy. So that's your own belief in your ability to learn or be able to do something.
Yeah.
So going back to the topic of education, if you're educating somebody who doesn't actually believe that they are good enough, smart enough, capable, or thinking about upbringing or the environment they were raised, if they come from a space where we didn't come from money, for example, they may not believe that it's for them. So then they're not even going to be in the right space to be open to the possibility that they can then go down that path and that product or service or even insurance policy is for them.
Yes.
So again, that's not even emotion, that's your attitude, right?
Yeah. It's that's an interesting one because, as I said earlier, one of the most common statements I get sort of told is I'm bad with money. I'm no good with money. I'm no good with numbers. I was really bad at maths, which what they're saying is it's written off all the years of whatever age they are of working with numbers and finances. And but it's interesting though. When we stop for a moment and think, do you go to the supermarket? Well, yes, I do. Well, do you look at the bargains? Do you look at the prices on products? Do you add things together? Well, yeah. Well, do you subtract things? Do you times things? Well, yeah. So who told you that you're bad at maths or bad with money? And it's almost like suddenly a person's thinking, oh, never thought of it like that. And yet it's a powerful belief. It's like a prison cell that holds somebody far stronger than any prison cell we could ever physically build.
Belief is such a key part. It's the crux of everything we do, right? If we don't think we can, or we're talking about also locus of control. What do you think is controlling your world? Is it you internally? Do you believe you have the power to make change? Or do you believe that external powers that be are in control of everything you do? And that's a reality for a lot of people. Yeah. And if it's external, then you're not going to be open to learning and taking in and making those changes, because no matter what you do, that's it. You're stuffed.
That just reminds me that there's a book called The 30 Lies About Money, and it's by a chap called Peter Koenig, and he talks about how we project upon money a power that money doesn't actually have. And so I often say to people, when you think about money, what's in one word, tell me what money means to you. And they might use things like freedom, control, power, choice, happiness, and there's fairly common phrases that people will tend to use. And then I say to them, so how much money would you need to feel free, to feel that you've got choice, or that you've got power or control? And suddenly they realize, well, nobody's ever asked me that question.
Yeah.
And so the reason why I'm asking you these questions is because I'm opening up for you a belief that we have that money has a power that's external to us that can determine our lives. And yet, actually, happiness comes from within. And we all have choice, because choice is not about the amount of money you have. Yes, it might help expand your choices, but you still have choice. And happiness is a decision of your will. Not that you're walking around going, I'm going to be happy, I'm going to be happy, when everything's falling apart around you. But you have a choice. And I use the example of Nelson Mandela, who, you know, incarcerated for 30 odd years, was freer than the people who incarcerated him. And I said, why was that? Because he made a choice about how he was going to respond. And as a result of that choice, was able when was free to lead a nation in reconciliation, not vengeance. And so it just goes to show we do, as human beings, have an ability to change, that we do have a choice, and it starts from within us. And it's just interesting when you're explaining what you're explaining, all of a sudden it's like addressing that belief that I can't change. Well, this is who I am. And actually, no, you can. You have the ability.
Such a real thing. And I was talking to someone just last week about, you know, them saying, but this is who I am. And, you know, I really tried hard, as gently as possible, to kind of expose examples of why that's not true in any area of their lives. But yeah, that can be a real blocker for people making improvements in all areas of their life, not just finance. Obviously, the stuff I studied is not just finance. It wasn't finance at all. It was more the fundamentals of psychology, right?
Yeah.
But just back to your point as well on, you know, the question of how much money is that when you say freedom? What is that number? And like you said, you know, 99% of people are like, And I think, you know, that as well, you know, when we're thinking about biases and influence and what gets people to think and do what they do with money, you know, the making six figures or £1 million, you know, that's the things that are banded around as the thing to have or the thing to aspire to. But actually, what's that going to do for you? And when you get people to maybe focus a bit more on their values and what kind of life do you want? What's really important to you? When you say you want freedom to do what? And often when you want to then monetize or calculate how much money is required to do that thing, all of my clients are surprised as to how small that money is. You know, it's not earning 10, 20, 30K per month. It's actually, you know, maybe a couple of grand, if that, to sustain that life. So it's just bringing them back to the reality, the logical side. And that's where you're basically kind of tearing away the emotional layers that are getting them to be kind of lost in this almost fairy make-believe land, which is largely just biases and emotions, and get down to, okay, what does this actually mean? It's just that, which is quite nice.
And it's interesting as well. I don't know about you, Crystal, but I just get a real buzz when I see somebody having that light bulb moment when they suddenly realize that actually they can change, and it's actually not that difficult. It's just a wonderful thing. I was thinking as well as you were talking then, the other side of the coin, in a sense, with regards to our mindsets, can be as well, because we're geared to identify where threats are possibly coming from, and the whole area of stress around money. That we can very easily fall into the catastrophizing. So when we're thinking about, so I can't change, I can't do, you know, the society out there is more in control than I am. All of a sudden, then you start to think, well, if I do, what if that happens? And before you know it, you've painted in your mind a picture of a world that doesn't exist, and there's no evidence to say it would ever exist. But now you're living as though it is, and therefore, in itself, influences the choices that you make about your money. Because that's a whole other area.
It is completely
powerful.
Yeah, scarcity mindset, thinking that there isn't enough available for you, so there's a panic to do XYZ, whatever that thing is, or you make the sharp, short, quick decisions out of panic. Again, back to what we said right at the beginning, you're not thinking logically, you're just kind of caught up in this emotional state. And as we are, annoyingly rigged to be negative, right? When we can easily quite quickly spiral down into this negative bias, and if we don't catch ourselves, and again, depending on what our past experience has shown us, or I say show as if to say it's conscious, but taught us and made us, given us our fundamentals of negativity, that it's just easier for us to continue down that road. And then once you're in that state, you then have confirmation bias, so you interpret everything you see as reinforcing what you believe, no matter what it is you see, which I think is one of the most fascinating biases.
It is. The fact that we're acting like a sieve, and we're sieving all the truth and the facts, the evidence that backs up what we believe, even though the evidence is not there. It's the opposite. But I can see that. I'm just thinking as well, on this subject, it naturally goes into the kind of challenges, some of the challenges that people face in life. And one of the other subject areas that you love to talk about is the neurodiversity and money. And there are certain nuances there. And I think if it's okay with you, if we just touch on this a little bit, because I think some of our listeners would find it not just fascinating, but really enlightening and encouraging for them, because all of us face challenges at times, and we think we're the only ones in it, when in actual fact we're not. So tell us a little bit about this neurodiversity and money.
Yeah, for sure. It's
a very important topic for me anyway, and seeing the people I work with and what it does for them. So, and I guess before we dive in on that, the point of not many people, or there are a lot of people who aren't even aware that they are neurodivergent. They are not. I was diagnosed in my late 30s, so I went through my whole schooling education without anyone picking up that I was dyslexic and had ADHD. So, but I just had to buckle up and just get going. But there are obviously varying levels of neurodivergence, and it comes, people have different traits. So, I got through, but there are still many people I encounter who really are struggling. If we talk about money now, really struggling with their individual traits, and that causes so much problems in day-to-day life, as you can imagine. We're talking about things such as working memory, so forgetting your bills, and not every utility provider or lender or whoever it is as nice as you'd like them to be when it comes to communicating with them and saying, I've made this mistake, or whatever it is, which then can maybe move over to things such as emotional dysregulation, which is where you're somewhat more sensitive emotionally to things that are happening around you. So if you've made a mistake and you're talking to somebody and they talk to you in any kind of sharp, aggressive or difficult way about money, you shut down, and I see that day in, day out. I was on a call with someone the other day who was crying because she didn't understand what her accountant was saying to her, and her accountant was getting frustrated. And then we've got things such as, shutdowns, meltdowns, which obviously would cause you to neglect your finances. And there are so many areas that neurodivergent traits show up in your finances that create serious issues when it comes to day-to-day money management.
I know one thing, and that is, picking up what we were just saying a moment ago. If somebody has a belief where they're no good with money or no good with numbers, to think sitting down and putting a spending plan together, just in itself, the thought of that brings an awful lot of stress. And so therefore there'll be a tendency to avoid it. What we probably term as burying the head in the sand. But in actual fact, it could be that there's more than just that going on. It could be that, there are some neurodivergent challenges there for an individual. Like you say, it's not been diagnosed in any way. They've not understood it. And think, well, I must be the odd one out. When in actual fact, there's so many people.
So many. And,
Yeah.
and so when
I would start working with somebody or talk to somebody firsthand, and they, are really quite timid and shy and embarrassed and ashamed of, this is the state of my finances, and I'm like, oh, is that it? Giving them the reassurance, because usually is that it? But we don't have the conversation of money. Money in society is a taboo subject, so no one's talking about it. So everyone's there by themselves, thinking that theirs is the worst, which is, I think there's a bias for that itself. When you think you're the worst or the best, whatever. Everyone can't be the worst. Everyone can't be the best.
I can't think what it is.
Yeah, I need to find it. But
yeah,
for sure. And ostrich effect. Bear in your head, that's the behavior. That's what you do. But yes, of course, underneath that is a reason. It could be, thinking about things like procrastination. You procrastinate because you're afraid of the negative feeling you might experience with the thing that you're supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
So you're avoiding it because you're afraid that it's going to be difficult. You're going to feel silly, whatever it is. So same here with the ostrich effect. You would avoid the task because you think it's going to be hard. You think you're going to struggle with it. You're afraid that you're going to be upset at what you've done with your money. Many of the people I encounter don't even look at their bank statement. They don't check, what's my bank balance? That is even a real pain point for them. And that all comes back to these things underneath.
I have some friends who have they've got 3 boys, but 2 of the boys are autistic. One is severely autistic. But what's interesting is they both have some real, almost like unique skills and abilities. And what was so encouraging to observe over the years, one of them particularly, as he grew up, got the chance to go to university. And even though people had kind of written him off, and I thought, that's the problem we have as a society, is we're very quick to judge things that we don't have all the facts about. And like you said, picking up that point about the fact that people don't, there's reasons that sit behind why somebody does something, but we don't ask the question. We just make an assumption.
Yeah, I mean,
it's hard because I was on a podcast just 2 days ago, actually, talking about partly this, and sometimes the person themselves doesn't actually know. So one, they may not even know that they're neurodiverse, fine, but even forget that, they're doing or behaving or thinking a certain thing, and maybe they don't even know why. So it can be quite difficult. I think, if we were to step out of that for a second, maybe it's just us being more empathetic, understanding that we have our differences, and actually, if we can anchor everything in our minds that people don't mean to do bad, do wrong, make mistakes, like that's not anyone's intention. But if they are making mistakes or doing things that are unhelpful, there's usually a reason for it underneath, and it's actually be empathetic to that. And just on your point about being autistic, etc., all we're talking about here is the brain's being wired differently. It doesn't mean anyone's less than or incapable. It's just different. When we talk about dyslexia and being more creative, and just on your point earlier as well about the math stuff, I think also a type of neurodivergence that is not often talked about is dyscalculia, which is the struggle with actual numbers and maths. Specifically, it's a bit like dyslexia, but for maths and numbers. And that's a real thing. Less common, maybe less common because it's less diagnosed and less spoken about. But that's a real thing for many people as well. That can obviously, of course, affect how you are with your personal finances, because many would literally be afraid to look at numbers on a piece of paper.
I know I spoke to, oh dear me, I'm trying to think of the organisation. There's an organisation that actually does a lot of work around numbers.
I think I know who you're talking about. I referred them to one of my charities that I work with, Maths on Toast. Yeah, I think I know.
Right. Yeah, and it's interesting. I hadn't realised they even existed.
Yeah.
But actually, it makes very, very good sense.
Amazing. Yeah.
And just really sort of helping people appreciate, A, they're not the only one, so they're not on their own, but B, what helps and supports are available for them to help them become
Yes.
You know, or you know, change that belief that they can't change or that they can't do this to, well, actually, I said to somebody, you know, I said, turn that statement, I'm bad with numbers, to I'm good with numbers when I use a calculator.
Yeah, I like that.
But yeah, and you know, even on that, it's like the assumption that you have to do things in a certain way. Actually, the lady I was on the podcast with, she was talking about the fact that we both did a maths degree, and was it the reasoning test? Us both hating them, and she didn't get a job because of one of those assessments. And it's like, I've got a maths degree. I'm obviously good at this stuff. It's just the way that it's presented or the way that you want me to answer it doesn't accommodate for my differences in how I process information. So like your point, you know, being bad at math isn't necessarily a thing. It's just the way your brain processes it. You need to do it in a different way. You know, part of the dyslexia assessment is maths and maybe remembering a series of numbers. And for me, for example, I remember the lady saying to me, what are you doing? Because I was looking up to the sky and literally writing the number out in the sky so I could remember it. And that is just the way that it works for some people.
Yes.
You still get there.
Yeah. I suppose people react because it's unusual for them in their thinking. It's an unusual behavior, and therefore I don't understand it.
Yes.
What's really going on?
Yes.
And I got that. I mean, just nothing to do with money, but my daughter, one of my daughters, had a similar experience when she's an audible learner. So, like you, she was listening, but she was looking elsewhere, and the teacher thought she wasn't paying attention. Must pay more attention, and actually, she was paying every attention because she was tapping into her learning style, 100%. Which was audible learning. So,
and this goes back, and that, you know,
we could go on another rabbit hole here talking about the education system and academia, and not accommodating for those differences, which links right back perfectly to financial education, right, and financial well-being. It being taught, because again, a large part of what I try to incorporate as well is accommodating different learning styles in that learning process. So not just getting everybody to read a bit of text or watch a video, actually have different variants so that those who have different learning styles and neurodivergence, etc., can actually take this in the way that works for them.
I think the challenge that we have in that area is, first of all, teachers are so stretched because of all that they've got to teach, and now the Prime Minister's talking about extending that further, so that those who are doing A levels having to study more subjects, not less, and study maths for longer. And I'm just thinking, here we are again, a lack of understanding of what's really needed and what's really going on. And so it must be sometimes hellish for teachers, because the teachers I've met have gone into that profession like ourselves, because we've seen a need, we've got a passion about it, we want to do something about it, we want to make a difference. And so you could say it's altruistic, but at the end of the day, it's actually helping change somebody's life. And it could be life-saving for some people.
I think it is.
It is, for sure. And I guess just back to the education stuff, it's sharing of the information and keep doing the work we're doing so that they can see that actually this isn't necessarily working, and maybe we should incorporate a bit more of the, you know, financial well-being into the education. More impact.
I worked in the money and debt advice world for a good number of years, and one of the things that really struck me when I first came into the industry was the fact that no one organization would cross the threshold of another. There was this sort of interesting belief that we were competitors, and I said this is unreal, because the demand on money and debt advice was greater than our ability to provide that help and that support. So where was the competition? And also, at the end of the day, we're all wanting to achieve the same outcomes. And so on that basis, I decided to start working on and approaching representatives from all the different organizations to get them together, and eventually accomplished it when the Financial Conduct Authority wanted to regulate money and debt advice. And so they put out their consultation papers, and I managed to invite all the organizations to sit round a table and actually look at what advice would we give the government, and in this case, Financial Conduct Authority, that would actually make sure that people are getting quality money and debt advice and support at the point of need, and that it didn't have those unintended consequences of hindering that good work going forward. And it was interesting, most of us, in fact, I think every area we talked about, we were all in agreement on, apart from one area, which eventually we were all in agreement on anyway. And I thought, I wonder if it's possible to do that in the world that we operate in, where we can then as a body come together and influence government to say, look, there's a way in which we can help the nation. Let us help you. Let us advise you of what would be the best way of being able to equip the next generations, and not put people in positions where they feel like they're written off because they don't meet this one size fits all. Because I can't learn that way, therefore I must be no good. When in actual fact, that's not true, as we've alluded to already. And I just wonder, it's almost like Martin Luther King. I have a dream.
That's where it starts.
That's where it starts. It has to start somewhere, and then it's just, like you said, picking up the bricks and trying to build that path or that house.
I think there are people like yourself, Chris Budd, another one, Ryan Briggs, myself and others who are really passionate about what we do. And I just wonder if the weight of us somehow coming together could really make a difference for the nation as a whole, as well as that individual that we work alongside of. That's my dream anyway.
Keep me up to date on the dream. I'm in.
Yeah, well, thank you, Crystal. I appreciate that, and thank you so much for this time of talking with you. I know there are many topics that we covered that we could actually delve right into.
For sure.
So we haven't really even scratched the tip of the iceberg.
We didn't talk about habits and behaviors. No, there's so much.
Oh yeah, there is, and maybe we could do this again at some point.
That'd be great. For sure.
Now, Crystal, I say this to all my wonderful guests. If somebody has been impacted by what we've talked about today, how could they get hold of you?
Thank you for that opportunity. I exist on somewhat every social platform. So just pop all my letters in, Crystal McGilvray, and I will pop up. I'm very much so on LinkedIn. I'm there almost every day. And I've got my own website, crystalmcgilvray.com, which talks about everything I do, including the organizations that I'm a director of. And my company, which is mainly in financial well-being and training, is wearemindovermoney.com.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. I know you do a podcast, and that's called Humanizing Finance.
Yes.
And I would encourage I'd encourage our listeners to go and find that and listen, but also as Rosie, as Crystal has said, go on to LinkedIn, because Crystal's got a lot of articles on there that she's written that I think are really powerful and encouraging and inspiring, and really helpful as well. So, do look it up. Don't suffer in silence. And I'm talking to those with money as well as those who've got little money.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah, and like what we said before, I work with business owners as well, and managers, etc. People who earn six figures many times over, who are struggling and feel that because they're earning those numbers shouldn't be going to get help, or they should have it sorted, and you don't have to suffer. That's not true. That's not true at all.
Exactly. Well said. Well said. Thank you so much, Crystal. Really appreciate this time with you. It's been wonderful. It's been really interesting and really exciting chatting with you. So all the very best going forward.